Hi everybody, I'm here with Enrico for clinical practice week 2. First of all, Enrico, let's talk about the rubric that you're judging me on this week.
Okay.
The rubric is on learning differences. Students, well, I was supposed to take into account students' diverse cultures, communities, where they're from, things like that. One of the big ones is to have positive and respectful interactions among students and to teach them about that. So during that lesson there, I taught them when they're working as teams that they should use that team acronym together. Everybody, what was my acronym again? Together, everybody
Achieves more.
Achieves more. That's it. Thank you. And to differentiate instruction for different students as well, and to differentiate instruction for students with learning differences or needs. To incorporate a few multiple perspectives from across the topic, and that one's for ELL, which English language learners, which I'll be doing. Obviously, that was the H class again, so their English was quite good. So the lesson. Let's go over my lesson plan. The lesson itself was here are the objectives. So first of all, I checked the room and wrote the objectives on the board. Right. The objectives were to analyse and identify what motivated the Spanish conquistadors. Why did they do it? And to be able to identify a primary and secondary source, identify its biases, and then quote it in their own writing. Last objective was to work cooperatively as a team to achieve objective 2. So did I achieve these objectives is one of the things I want to talk about. To analyse and identify what motivated the Spanish conquistadors. So I sort of give them a hint by saying that it's either gold, God, or glory, which is what most people say. I tried to use your anchoring idea by giving them an early quote. So I took that encyclopedia thing about what a conquistador was, and asked them if it was a primary and secondary source. It wasn't the most interesting of quotes, but it got them thinking about primary and secondary sources early on in the lesson. I then got them to write down some of the key vocabulary because they are Chinese students. Words like conquistadors and conqueror is still very difficult for them, so I spent 5 minutes on that. I then asked them whether they think they were motivated by gold, God, or glory, and then had them working in groups. Before I started having them work in groups, I told them that team acronym. In groups, they were looking at different quotes. Some of them had really difficult quotes. So you saw there I was working with very, very long quotes, and I was quite conscious that some students would want to be challenged and others wouldn't. So I was conscious of Kywin and Peggy, who was asleep during that lesson, and quite often loses focus, and tried to give them easier quotes to work with. Kywin struggled with it through that lesson. Like I say, Peggy was asleep. That happens quite often with Peggy. She just sort of switches off and goes to sleep. And then there was the 4 boys at the back, who's Tim, Ken, John, and Buddy, who when I asked, and Dennis, when I asked if they want a hard one or an easy one, said a hard one, because they like to be challenged in that way. But they're part of the debate club. Now that long quote was extremely difficult, and maybe I should have shortened that down. But some of the other ones were a lot shorter, and I was hoping to get more out of them than I did, to be perfectly honest. So that's one of the things that I need to think about. So they all had a quote each. One of them was a picture, so that was a simple one too. And they were supposed to talk about where the quote came from, whether they think it represented gold, God, or glory, for why the Spanish conquistadors came, if they can trust that quote, and if it's a primary or secondary source. So you can see the questions there. Unfortunately, that's a 35-minute class, and really, I expected them to be on the ball today, like really to get into it and get it done. But a lot of them struggled with a lot of the long-worded vocabulary, and so lost a lot of interest and didn't finish the questions. I was expecting that class to go a lot smoother than it did. Students seem to lack interest in this, and I think it's because they were thrown something extremely difficult. Whereas on a good day, if you throw them something extremely difficult, they'll work hard and consider it a challenge, and I was hoping for one of those good days, but I didn't get one of them with them. Eventually, what I wanted them to do is to talk back to me about what they learned as a team. Some of them did that. There was more students who were engaged than others, so you might have seen Ivor was shouting out all the answers, Eddie the twins, Mike and Eric, they always shouted out the answers, and a lot of the other students switched off. So I don't think I did very well there. And then eventually I give them that essay question, which is one of the things we've worked on, good things and bad things, and I want them to start using that quote in there. In general, I wasn't happy with that lesson. I'm not going to lie. It became very disorganized, and I expected them to react differently to it. What I need to be doing in the future is sort of making sure certain points work in certain lessons before I go in there, and using skills that I have instead of trying new things straight away. So what do you think?
Okay. Well, I mean, from my vantage point, I will say that, for one thing, from what I was seeing, I walked around and looked at the groups as they were working. Most of them did seem to be fairly on task, even if, they might have been struggling with it. They were actually doing the task, which is always obviously a good thing. Also, they do seem, as a group, they seem to generally understand the difference between primary and secondary sources. Now, at least they can identify which one is which, and they're starting to get a decent understanding of the concept of bias. You know, when you ask the question, can we trust and why? Maybe only a few students actually piped up and answered, but it's seeping in, and this is a complex thing.
Yeah, it is, and I didn't want to actually directly approach the idea of bias, but instead ask questions like, "Do you think we can trust this idea?"
Yeah, well, that's a good foundation to build upon later and go into more detail. So, yeah, I don't actually have as negative an impression of that class as you did.
I generally do have negative impressions whenever I film them, but I always feel like everything is going to pot. I just get very, very nervous.
Well, I think teachers, especially when you are filming a lesson, a lot of teachers, they want it to be perfectly smooth. That almost never happens when you have a group activity, just because of the nature of the activity and what you're trying to accomplish. So what I was looking for was, do the students seem to understand the content? Vocabulary-wise, in terms of the complexity of the text, they struggled, but they seemed to get the main points from what I observed. Now, I did have a question with the essay, the homework. You asked them some questions about what goes into an essay, and they seem to know that. Do they have any other kind of template that they're working with for how to write an essay? Or?
They've so it's been drilled into them hundreds of times over the course of grade 7 that when we do essay questions, normally what I'll do is I'll give them a statement, and I'll say, do you agree with this statement? Do you disagree with this statement? And what I'm looking for you to do is to argue both sides. So I'll say something like, China is the best country in the world. Reasons why I agree with this statement, reasons why I disagree with this statement, and what I actually think. Their tests that they've been doing in the past, they're marked out of 5. So I asked them for 2 statements that say I agree with the sentence, 2 that disagree, and that last point is for the I think sentence. One of the things that I did wrong in that lesson is that it wasn't actually an agree or disagree statement. It was more of a, can you say some things about, what was the question again? The question was, what was the main motivation for the conquistadors conquering South America? What I was looking for them to do is to say some of the motivations were this, 2 reasons, some of the motivations were this, 2 reasons, and what I actually think is this. Some of them got that, some of them didn't. Some of them were asking, how do I do this? But they generally know that they just have to write as much as they can and look at both sides of the argument. That's written down in all their notebooks. And they've had worksheets on this in the past.
All right, I'd be very interested in seeing what they produce for that. Also, the homework, the last class I watched, just following up on that, how was the homework checked for that? Did they do their homework last time?
This will be checked next lesson.
Okay.
This will be checked next lesson. It's checked second lesson every week.
Okay.
So they've got a full week to do it.
All right.
Yeah. So next lesson they'll be doing some review questions regarding what they've learned in previous classes. We'll just talk about organising notebooks and homework and things like that.
Okay.
So it's really one of those lessons where we just make sure everything's in order.
Okay. I mean, my only advice in terms of dealing with the complexity of the text, it really depends how much. I know you don't have a lot of class time with them. Perhaps as part of the homework, they could have a vocabulary list. They just need to find out, the meaning of certain keywords in these more difficult texts. Doing, as much work as possible in advance, so that when you come to the classroom, they're not spending all that class time, struggling through it so much. But that's, again, that depends how you want to use your time.
Okay, thank you very much.